to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm your host, Buford Carroll. The program is brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Our guest tonight will be Mark Bennett, the President-elect of the Harris County Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Buford.
There have been a lot of things in the news recently, but I think probably the most important is the results of the Super Tuesday primaries yesterday. And they're important, I think, because they have rescued the upcoming Texas primaries from being an afterthought to being possibly the most crucial primary election this state has seen since I can remember anyway. Which also means that there will be a lot more local interest and opportunity in downslate elections as well. And I think the one that Mark and I intend to talk about the most tonight will probably be the Harris County District Attorney's election. And to me, the District Attorney is probably the key elective office in the United States. This is nationwide. There have been some other news, like the installation of a vending machine in one of the medical marijuana dispensaries in California. Although I must say that if what I've heard about that is correct, with the vending machine price being $100 for an eighth of an ounce, the patients are probably better off trying to score illegal weed on the street corner. That price sounds a bit outrageous to me. Medical marijuana seems to be approaching ballot status in a couple of places again this year. So several developments that will come along with the political season. We may have our normal phone call from Dean Becker in a few minutes. He's not with us yet. If Dean calls in, we will let him give you his update. But first, let's start a conversation with Mark. Good to have you here tonight.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
And as a criminal defense lawyer, I'm sure that you're well acquainted with the work of the local district attorney and also have at least passing interest in the drug laws.
Absolutely. Because of the war on drugs, most of a plurality of the cases that are being prosecuted down at the Harris County Courthouse are drug cases. So I would say most of my work is defending drug cases in state court against the adversary is the Harris County DA's office.
Okay.
So this change in the DA's office is it's fascinating to me to watch this slide downhill by the DA's office.
Well, I've been in Houston almost 25 years now. And my whole time it has been either Johnny Holmes or his designated successor, Chuck Rosenthal. So in a sense, this looks like it's going to be a major change for Harris County.
Could very well be. And I say that with a little reserve because one of the candidates for DA is Kelly Siegler. And I think that Kelly Siegler would have been among the people that Chuck Rosenthal might have chosen as his successor had he left in the normal course.
She's what, Chief of Special Crimes Unit?
She's Chief of the Special Crimes Division of the DA's office. She's held other positions there, but she's been there for 20 plus years. She's one of the best trial lawyers in the office, without a doubt.
I think what most of us have probably heard of her is that she's done a lot of prosecution of capital cases.
Yes, and those are the cases that get a lot of publicity. So if you look at Kelly's website, she talks about the cases she's won, and all of them have been against Dick DeGuerin's office. So the cases that people have heard of, where people have heard of Kelly, have been Kelly against Dick in a murder trial.
Yeah. So it's very much the top of the heap on both sides there.
Oh, in those trials, absolutely, absolutely. It's the clash of the legal titans.
Yeah. Well, aren't most of the other Republican candidates at least also don't they also have backgrounds in the Harris County District Attorney's office?
No, by no means. Jim Leitner does. He's a defense lawyer who's a former prosecutor. Right. He's very qualified, and everybody considers him to be an excellent candidate. The prosecutors and the defense lawyers agree that he would make a good DA. But then there's Pat Lycos.
She's been a district judge.
She was a district judge.
A prosecutor before
She was never a prosecutor.
Oh, really?
She went from the police department, got her law degree while she was in the police department, went almost immediately to the bench. There was an intervening time when she was at a civil practice law firm.
Okay.
As far as I can tell, she never tried a criminal case as a lawyer. And then she went to the bench and was on the bench for, I don't know how long she was on the bench, but for some time, long enough to make quite a reputation for herself. And the fourth candidate is Doug Perry, who was the HPD jail captain, I guess they call it, the Houston police, running the Houston jail. And while he was a cop, he got his law degree and he got his accounting degree, and he's worked as a lawyer while working as a cop, and worked as an accountant while working as a cop. But again, as far as I can tell, he's never actually tried a criminal case, or never even handled a criminal case, as far as I know.
Right, what I had understood is that he had not done any criminal trial work.
And I think that's true of Judge Lycos as well. I mean, she's been the judge presiding over cases, but the DA's office, or whoever's running the DA's office, is going to be leading 260 trial lawyers.
Yes.
Trial lawyers are very ornery individuals who are notoriously difficult to lead.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, trial lawyering is kind of almost an old-fashioned knight in armor or World War I flying ace. It's a gunslinger.
Gunslinger, samurai. Yeah. That's how we see ourselves.
Yeah, and it's that personality that succeeds in that. But I think it's been kind of my feeling that except for credibility with his or her own staff, the district attorney himself doesn't need the trial background as much as he needs an administrative and policy background.
I think that's correct, but I think your first clause there, except for credibility with his staff, I think that's very important.
Yeah.
I think the trial experience is very important because to ethically lead, or to lead people to be ethical lawyers, you need to have walked the walk.
Okay.
So the DA needs to set an example for his or her staff, and in order to be able to say, look, if you're in trial, you don't do that. He needs to be someone, or she needs to be someone who has actually been there and has had an opportunity to do that, whatever it was, and has forborne herself.
Now, well, let me interrupt you here on the words you used. When you talked about leading his staff to act ethically. Years ago, I taught professional responsibility for several years at Boston. And at the time, one of the things that bothered me was that in all of the records that we could find all across the United States, there had only been one prosecutor who had been subject to disciplinary sanctions of any kind. And I'm aware of one that's turned up since then. It looks to me like there's not much ethical enforcement on the prosecutor's side of the table.
I believe that's absolutely true. A prosecutor might say, well, we enforce it amongst ourselves, the office takes care of it. But I believe what you're saying is absolutely true, and there is a combination of at least two factors. The two factors that I can think of off the top of my head are the lawyers who are trying cases against the prosecutors are generally reluctant to file grievances against them because DAs have a lot of power over the lawyer's clients. So a lawyer, if he thinks that his next client might get hurt by reason of the lawyer having filed a grievance against the prosecutor, might resist doing it. And the second factor, which combines with the first, is that bar grievance committees are very, very, very reluctant to uphold grievances against prosecutors. And in the cases where a lawyer does take, or an organization takes a grievance to the bar, they don't give them the same sort of attention that we perceive them giving grievances against private lawyers.
I think another problem there is that most of the citizens that are injured by prosecutorial misconduct don't exactly have sterling reputations when it comes to bringing.
That's true. That's true. They've, to a certain extent, through the misconduct, perhaps they've lost a lot of their credibility with the public.
Well, I think here locally there's another problem in that the trial judges, whom we really expect to some extent to enforce the bar rules as well, in Harris County, at least, almost all, if not all, of the criminal district attorneys are alums of the district attorney's office, or criminal district judges that come from the DA's office.
Almost all, if not all. I mean, there are some that have private defense experience as well, but even those generally have been to the DA's office before being private lawyers.
Well, I think this is something we might should point out to people, is that across the United States as a whole, a lot of the ways that defense attorneys get their training is to spend a few years in a prosecutor's office, so that it's not at all unusual to find defense lawyers that have a prosecutorial background.
Not at all unusual. Because of the lone wolf samurai gunslinger mentality, there aren't a lot of criminal defense firms that have more than a couple of lawyers in them. So it's hard for somebody coming out of law school to find a job practicing as a criminal defense lawyer. So the other options for someone who wants to be a criminal lawyer are to be a prosecutor or to start his or her own practice.
And I know that we don't have public defenders here in Harris County, and in the U.S. Attorney's Office here, the public defender's office at the federal level is so overworked that they don't hire anyone unless they've already got a lot of experience.
Well, they don't hire anyone who doesn't have a lot of experience because they don't have to, because they really are elite.
Okay. I would have to talk. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Sir, what is the limitation of getting the case expunged?
What was that again, sir?
What is the limitation of getting the case expunged off your record?
Oh, okay, thank you. He's asking what are the instances in which you can get a record expunged. I noticed that the lawyer who's been complaining about Rosenthal in this email case actually got complaint against him expunged this week.
In Texas, to get records of an arrest expunged, you have to have had the case dismissed or acquitted. And you can't have had probation for anything more than a Class C misdemeanor, which is the equivalent of a traffic ticket. So if you take deferred adjudication probation for a felony or for a serious misdemeanor, you can never get it expunged. It's never going to be off your record. If you're convicted, it's never going to be off your record. If you get acquitted, if you go to trial and win, you can get it expunged pretty quickly. But if it just gets dismissed, go in there and they decide they made a mistake and they dismiss the case, you have to wait until the limitations period for the offense has expired before you can get it expunged.
So there's no possibility of it being refiled.
Right. So it's a difficult thing to do. Most people who think that they want it done aren't entitled to it, but a lot of people are and don't take advantage of it.
And I think this reminds me of something that probably most people need to be reminded of, and this is that even if you have been acquitted of something, even if you had fulfilled probation and therefore had the charges dismissed, for a lot of purposes on applications of different kinds, you're still required to say that you have been arrested and that being untruthful may get you in more trouble than the offenses.
That's true, and a particularly common occurrence is that somebody will take deferred adjudication probation, will believe that means that it'll be off his record, and then either will not tell a landlord about it, or will not tell an employer about it, and will get in trouble for that because they'll do a background check, and the people who do background checks, landlords, employers, and so forth, they treat this the same as a conviction.
Right. So, let's since we brought it up, let's go to a break, and then we'll come back in a few minutes.
I consider marijuana the worst of all narcotics. 5 words. The use of morphine or cocaine under the influence, there become beasts.
Yo, my name is Sammy C, and as you can see, the feds got me locked up in the penitentiary. I got a murder to my left and a rapist on my right, and all I did was toke on my peace pipe. America has since spent $25 billion locking up people who were trying to chill. They weren't trying to fight, they weren't trying to kill, but since 1937, they have totaled 17 mil. Now, I don't need to tell y'all what's wrong with that when I did the same time as them violent cats. Look, I know almost half of y'all smoked a dime, so who knows how many of you could be doing time. And even then, running after prison, trying to turn a new page. Well, I got news for you. You're earning minimum wage, because the Fed won't approve your financial aid. So I don't know how you think you're getting college paid. Maybe you can join the Army, get the GI Bill, but better not line up, or your battle's uphill. They'll throw your butt out of the service dishonorably. All that fuss because you smoked a little THC. And if your grandma wants to hit it for her chronic pain, then in most of America, she's legally to blame. So come on, normal people, join me in this fight. We gotta do something now, cause this mess ain't right. We gotta take it to D.C., tell Congress there. Stop arresting pot users, spend the money elsewhere. Smoking pot is normal. What?
Well, we were talking about district attorneys and ethics before the break, and one of the things I think that's important to note is that while the courts and the bar committees don't seem to do much disciplining, I know Barry Schenck about 10 years ago wrote a book called Actual Innocence, based upon the cases where DNA evidence had proved people convicted of serious crimes had been factually innocent. And while the most obvious and common cause for the conviction was an erroneous personal identification, in almost half the cases, either prosecutorial misconduct or police misconduct was involved. So here we've got something that's a pretty big elephant in the room, yet the courts don't do anything about it. It seems to me that the only ethical constraint on district attorneys is the voter.
I think that's absolutely true. But the problem is that the voters they're not paying attention. And it takes a case like the Duke lacrosse team case in North Carolina to get it out into the public. And of course, when that happens, everybody acts like they've been taking care of business all along, like this is an anomaly, and of course we're going to disbar this guy. But the fact is that there's prosecutorial misconduct in every court in the country every day of the year, and most people just don't care because the people who are the victims of it are the disenfranchised anyway.
Well, I think there's something else at work. A million years ago, when I was in law school, Dallas had one of those all-powerful, long-term district attorneys, a man named Henry Wade. And I first noticed, he happened to be the district attorney at the time of the Kennedy assassination. But I first noticed it because in studying criminal law in law school, I kept running into things from the Court of Criminal Appeals where the opinion would start out and say, this is another case of prosecutorial misconduct from Dallas County. And the word came out that in his training lectures to his new prosecutors, Henry Wade says, we convict him on page 1, and the court reverses on page 27. Don't worry about it. And I think the problem, when I read the newspaper, if an appellate court reverses a conviction, it never comes out in the newspaper that the prosecutor did something wrong or made a mistake. It's always the bad guy got off on a technicality.
Reversals on prosecutorial misconduct are rare as hen's nowadays, first of all. So I can't, I'm sure that there have been one or two in the last decade, but I can't think.
But even so, when they reverse for improperly introduced evidence, or
right, the press looks at it as a technicality, as somebody gaming the system. Like a lawyer in East Texas once said to me, slick big city lawyers using the rules to their advantage. And that's the fact is that there are no technicalities, that it all matters, that the rules are what matters.
Well, and once again, at the time I was a student, I think the thing that was driven home to me was that the defense lawyer's job, as much as anything, his constitutional role, was to make sure the government played by the rules.
That's what our contract says.
Yeah.
Our contract is the Sixth Amendment, which
Yeah.
says that everybody's entitled to the effective assistance of counsel.
And if the government doesn't follow the rules, we're all in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And either if there's nobody to make the government follow the rules, or if the government is able to steamroll over them, then absolutely we are all in trouble. There's nobody to stop them.
Yeah. And I think also most people don't realize the extreme amount of discretion that a district attorney has.
Tremendous power.
Yeah, I know Rosenthal has been quoted several times as saying, "I don't make the law, I just enforce it." But well, let's have a caller first. And hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, what is the easiest way for a citizen to obtain a copy of their own criminal record?
Okay.
The tough part of this question is that criminal records are maintained at different levels: national level, the state level, the county level. If you know where your criminal history was, if you know where you've been in trouble, you can go to those counties and get a letter of disposition from those counties saying this is what you have had in this county. Now, the DPS records are not public records. The DPS, the Texas Department of Public Safety records of your criminal history. But there may be an exception there, and I have to plead ignorance. There may be an exception there. You may be able to get your own criminal history from the Texas Criminal Information Center, the TCIC.
But even so, it would not necessarily, for instance, show Class B misdemeanor conviction in Crosby County, would it?
It ought to.
It ought to.
It
is that complete.
Right. Probably not Class C misdemeanors, the equivalent of traffic tickets,
Right.
but everything above that ought to turn up on TCIC. And I'll tell you, if it doesn't turn up when you look in your county and you look at TCIC, then you probably don't have to worry a whole lot about it. Now, you may actually be able to go online with Texas Department of Public Safety and get a copy of what's public of your criminal history. What's public is what they release to companies like publicdata.com, AutoTrack. So the employers are using these companies. Generally, private employers are using these companies to do the background checks. So you can find a lot of that information online. I
used to use public data occasionally, just out of personal curiosity. And that time it was about $25 a year, and you can type in a name or a driver's license number or an address, and amazing what you can find out.
It's $25 for 250 searches, so you're paying a dime a search, and you never use 250 searches. But there's driver's license stuff, there's license plate stuff, and there are criminal histories, and from 20-some different states. So that's, if I have a witness, I'll go online and I'll search for their criminal history just to see what's out there. If it's a state's witness, I'll look at it to make sure that I know everything about them that I can know.
Well, the caller, I think, brought up something else. I remember several years ago, there was a lot of problems about the ways in which local law enforcement agencies and courts communicated with the national criminal data networks. And one of the problems was that they were awfully lax about following up when cases were dismissed or charges were never filed after an arrest, so that there might be unsubstantiated charges floating around in the national system for years.
I'll see that regularly. Every time somebody's arrested in Harris County, the DA's office will run an NCIC check on them and TCIC check on them. And so I'll see the printouts of these checks, which otherwise aren't public information. And I'll see that it shows that a person was arrested in South Dakota for such and such an offense, and then they'll say no court information, no prosecution information. And so obviously something happened there with the arrest, and it was probably dismissed, but it's in the computer, and it's in the computer forever. Now, I don't know how much of this is accessible to employers. I would guess that somebody in South Dakota, checking South Dakota's system, would find the same thing.
Yeah, well, they might find more because they'd be going to the local database. The real problem is that NCIC nationwide one is the one that law enforcement uses for a lot of its...
That law enforcement uses, right. And it's not admissible in court, but you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride sometimes.
Right.
If the police look you up and think you're a punk because of what shows up in NCIC, you're going to be in some sort of trouble, and you may be able to beat it in the end, but it can be painful and costly to do so.
Yeah. I want to go back to the district attorney here, and this is on the issue of the district attorney's discretion. And For instance, in Texas, we have a statute making possession or delivery of drug paraphernalia a crime. Yet, in most of the cities around the state, district attorneys have kind of winked their eyes at nonprofit groups carrying on needle exchange programs. There are none in Houston because Rosenthal has said, it's a crime, I'm going to bust you if you try it. The legislature tried to install a trial program in San Antonio, and the district attorneys there said, don't you try it in my city because you didn't say Mother May I when you passed the statute. I know Harris County probably has more capital convictions than almost any state other than Texas, and close to half of all of the Texas capital convictions.
Year in and year out, Harris County sends more people to death row than any state.
Yeah, I mean, and these are all discretionary decisions made within the district attorney's office.
Another good example is the recent statute passed allowing arrests for example, Class B possession of marijuana, less than 2 ounces
using
of marijuana.
a citation rather than an arrest.
Using a citation and not a custodial arrest.
Yeah.
Haul the person into court that way, and the Harris County law enforcement refuses to do it because Chuck Rosenthal says no.
But as I remember, Chuck was quoted in the paper as saying, if you don't arrest him, I won't prosecute him.
Something to that effect.
And the way the statute was worded, it required each county or judicial district administrative judges to institute a program of how the policy would be carried out. And after Chuck spoke, there's just been no action in Harris County.
Most of the judges on the bench, if not all of them, were prosecutors either under Chuck Rosenthal or under his predecessor, Johnny Holmes.
Well, and this is something I've heard as rumor, and I don't know anything other than rumor, that if Holmes at his time and Rosenthal now doesn't like the way judges are ruling, that they will simply stop sending cases to that court.
I don't think that's true. I don't think the DA's office has that sort of authority to decide whether cases go to one court or another. And I'll tell you, that would probably be a gift to a lot of those judges. A lot of those judges would probably be perfectly happy to have a lot fewer cases. So if they thought that they could make a couple rulings against the state and get fewer cases, some of them would be happy to do it.
Well, when we were talking earlier, you told me that probably a plurality of all of the cases in Harris County now were drug cases. It would look to me like it would be common sense on the part of the prosecutor to divert some of these cases away from the courts if possible, either through more use of probation or even just not prosecuting it.
Not more use of probation. There's plenty of probation.
Yeah.
They're really, and perhaps too much probation. People will take probation even though they're setting themselves up to fail, and the DAs try to get people to take probation.
Well, my understanding here, once again, is that the way the prosecutors here look at probation, it's really a gotcha system, and that it's not an attempt to get the guy through and work his problems out. It's, you're 2 days late on a single payment, we bust you. You don't show up for one drug test, we bust you. It's,
I don't think that's entirely fair. I don't think it's entirely true. There are courts, there are CLOs who are the probation officers in the courts who seem to be that rigid about it. Yeah. But then there are also, and I think it's court driven rather than prosecutor driven. I think there are courts that are a little bit more understanding, a little bit more forgiving. Yeah. Now we have the drug court, which is specifically designed to help people succeed when they have drug problems.
Let me ask you about that. In Harris County, we've got one drug court. And what's its caseload?
I don't know what its caseload is. Okay. And the interesting thing about the drug court is that ordinary lawyers like me aren't practicing in the drug court. The drug court has its own lawyers. If you're an accused and you want to be in the drug court, you take the drug court lawyer.
Okay, we have to take a break now. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Jill Lawrence, a 17-year-old from Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He won't be graduating from high school with his friends this spring. He can't. He's in jail, serving a 2-year sentence for selling 1 joint's worth of marijuana, about a teaspoonful, to an undercover cop. He's never been arrested before, but he got 2 years in prison for 1 joint's worth of pot. Not community service, not a fine. 2 years. A cost to taxpayers of nearly $100,000. And a criminal record for life. How could this happen in America when 100 million Americans have smoked marijuana? It takes 2 things, a bad law and a cruel prosecutor. Mitchell was busted in a drug-free school zone. But drug-free zone laws keep drugs out of our schools and protect our kids, right? Wrong. These laws do nothing to protect children. They just fill our prisons with young people like Mitchell Lawrence. 98% of people arrested in drug-free school zones weren't selling drugs to children. 95% of all sales aren't near any schools. And most of those arrested didn't even know they were in a so-called school zone, including Mitchell Lawrence. He didn't know that virtually the entire town of Great Barrington, like most American cities, is covered by giant drug-free zones. Mandatory prison for anyone arrested within 1,000 feet of a school. That's 3 football fields. It's a bad law that cruel prosecutors abuse, like fanatical District Attorney David Capeless. He decided to press school zone charges on Mitchell Lawrence, a felony for a $20 sale. What happened to Mitchell is happening to young Americans all around the country. The only thing unusual about Mitchell is the color of his skin. 97% of all people arrested in drug-free zones aren't white. The time has come to reform these draconian laws and elect prosecutors who care about reason, compassion, and justice. We need your help to do it. Make our struggle your struggle. Stand with the Lawrence family by supporting a candlelight vigil on the courthouse steps. And join our fight to change these unjust laws. Become a member of the Drug Policy Alliance.
It's now time for our report from Dean Becker of the Drug Truth Network. Hello, Dean, are you there? Hello, Dean, are you there? I guess we'll have to try again in a minute. We were talking about the Harris County Drug Court, and you were pointing out to me the distinction between deferred adjudication and pretrial diversion.
Deferred adjudication stays on your record forever.
Okay.
And the problem with that is that employers and landlords and such, they hold it against you forever.
Okay. Let's try again.
Okay.
Hello, you're on the air.
Thank you, Buford. We got patched through this time.
Okay.
I want to thank you and Mr. Bennett for sharing his thoughts with the Houston community. Mr. Bennett, I don't know what you know about me. I want to introduce myself and talk to you briefly if I can. I produce 9 radio shows each week about the harms of the drug war. I'm a former cop, a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We're a group of about 10,000 people worldwide who work together to end this policy. We see it as an absolute abysmal failure. We are called to speak to fraternal organizations, churches, schools, colleges. We are called upon more and more to speak to legislative bodies about our opinions derived from our time examining this policy. And I had your, I don't know if you call him predecessor, Mr. Pat McCann, was a guest on my show just last week. We were talking about this situation, the criminal justice system in Harris County. And I want to extend to you, first off, an offer to come on my radio shows whenever we get the chance. But secondarily, I want to just kind of touch upon the fact that you and Buford have been discussing Houston leads the world in many categories, insofar as its implementation of certain laws, and particularly the drug laws, as we all know. Our jails are overcrowded. People are sleeping next to toilets. We're shipping people to Louisiana. And many times these people are in there for minuscule amounts, paraphernalia amounts actually, residue inside of a pipe, an empty bag that had enough grains to be tested. And it is a vast waste of our fiscal and physical resources. We need to have our policemen out there chasing down the murderers, the rapists, the molesters, going after people who commit crimes, people who we should, fear, not people we're mad at because they took a product we consider to be immoral. And I guess, sir, what I want to know is, will you, as an experienced attorney, do you know any reason, considering the enormous blowback, funding of the terrorists, enriching the cartels, empowering the gangs, and making drugs available to our children through the world's largest multi-level marketing organization, the black market in drugs? Can you tell us any positive, any reason why this should continue for another day?
I still have payments to make on my Mercedes.
That's the answer I got from Mr. McCann, and I think it, excuse me, but frivolous. It's like when you talk about people being sent to prison and they'll get their payback from some big cellmate. This is the mindset that's put forward by Doritos and even beer companies. It is this, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime.
No, it's a huge sink of resources, and I'll tell you that the money is going to the cartels. It's going to the dealers. It's going to the people who profit from the danger of drugs who profit from the illegality. And that's the people who are moving it, the people who are moving it across borders, the people who are moving it past checkpoints, and then the prosecutors, the cops, the judges, the defense lawyers, the probation officers. There are people who profit from the war on drugs.
Don't forget the private corporations that run jails on contract.
Right, and the private corporations that support all of these ventures.
Sure, they're lobbyists and the politicians that get the votes by being, quote, tough on crime.
By frightening people into voting for them. Absolutely, and my flippant answer is really the truth, that is the only good reason, that the only reason that anybody who knows what's going on would support the war on drugs is because they have some sort of personal stake in it, and the people the people in the system who are shouting loudest about the system being wrong, the defense lawyers, are probably the ones who individually have the largest stake of any of the legitimate players, at least.
All right. If you'll excuse me, Buford, but I do have another moment or two here.
Okay.
Secondarily,
why don't I come on your show?
Well, no, that will be fine. But while I got you, I want to just offer this up. You don't have to answer. I don't want to pin you down. But I belong to this group of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and one of our members is a current working state representative, state of Washington, who has expressed an interest in coming to Houston. He's worked with the King County Bar Association in Seattle, and they have put together a massive and rather well-developed look at this problem of drugs and how they're trying to change it there. And I would like to give you that in advance of our being on the radio, so you can look at it and see if they don't have perhaps a better way we could go. With that, I'm going to close out with the thought that these radio shows I spoke of are available each week on KPFT Radio, which is 90.1 FM. The half hour on Tuesday is Century of Lies. It comes on at 11:30 a.m. till noon. 11:30 to a.m. on Wednesdays is Cultural Baggage. We interview judges, congressmen, you name it, anyone willing to talk about the subject. And soon we'll have Mr. Mark Bennett on to talk about what we can do in the future. And gentlemen, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dean.
I might add that the King County Bar Association, which is primarily the Seattle area, has been a real leader for many years now about looking at reforming the drug law situation and taking a really active stance on it. And I've been in communication recently with a committee member of the New York City Bar talking about putting together a seminar for New York lawyers on the history of Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. So this is one thing where several bar associations are becoming rather active. We have another caller. So, hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hey, guys. I wanted to call in and tell you, I totally support what y'all are doing. I think it's really important to get the message out about what a fraud that the drug war is and how it's destroying our society. But I wanted to ask y'all real quick if y'all have seen any of these policy reports by the RAND Corporation or the British Ministry of Defense that are doing projections now on what Western society is going to be like in the next 20 or 30 years. And all of their projections point to a complete surveillance, panopticon, control grid society. And I mean, I think this is really pertinent, especially, when we find out that out in the countryside, the HPD's flying around testing predator spy drones for use on the public. There are red light cameras and cameras going up all over the city. If you flip to Wired magazine's issue for next month, literally the military is starting to build robotic troops that have machine guns. I mean, we are living in the future. And for all the viewers out there, I really hope they realize how critically important the drug war has been as an aspect of bringing this control grid into our lives. And what we are seeing now is just the beginning. This system and the blossoming of it and its predatory nature, we've only just seen its infancy in the last 50 years. Where it's going is going to be something beyond Orwell, beyond anything that we ever imagined. Thank you very much.
Before you answer, Mark, I want to repeat something that's been my mantra ever since 9/11. And it's a quotation from Benjamin Franklin, that he who would give up freedom for security soon will have neither.
It deserves neither.
I think
he said.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What we're talking about here is the government using fear to bring us into compliance. And the reason we allow the government to put up red light cameras, we're afraid. The reason that it's even conceivable that HBD could be using predator drones to watch us, we're afraid. And we're in two wars right now, but neither one of them is a war. We've got a war on terror. It's not a war. You can't make a war on a concept. You can't make a war on an idea any more than you can make war on drugs. You make war on peoples and on states and on governments. So I'm beginning to. I don't like the phrase war on terror because it cons people into thinking that it's really a war, and things are different during wartime. But why would we use the term war on drugs? It's as much a fraud as war on terror.
I think if I were dictator of the world for 30 seconds, the first thing I would do would forbid the use of the word war as a metaphor, because it doesn't do anything but put us on the wrong track.
People confuse the metaphor with the real thing, with the truth in the instance of war.
Someone else. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hi. I am a recently retired probation officer from the Harris County Adult Probation Department, supervisor, as a matter of fact. And the attorney there made a comment about the people who benefit from the war on drugs, and I can guarantee you that probation officers are the last class of people that benefit at all from the war on drugs. As a matter of fact, having so many drug cases tie up the time of probation officers, and the industry of probation, by the way, is woefully and has been woefully underfunded for years and years. The lion's share, as you probably know, of monies in the criminal justice system goes to enforcement and jails and prisons and all the things that you folks already know about and mentioned some of them. But probation officers would be able to attend some of those more important and pressing cases if they didn't have to be tied up with such high, ridiculous caseloads, an average of 120 cases per officer. And so anyway, just wanted to set the record straight about probation officers, because they don't get near the recognition that they should, and they're also responsible for actually significant savings in the criminal justice monies. So, for what it's worth, I'll let you respond, and I'll hang up.
Before Mark responds, let me ask you a couple of questions. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. If you're a supervisor, I assume you've been with the probation department some time.
Right.
And you're talking about a caseload of 120 cases. What was that caseload when you started?
Well, when I started, it was, as you mentioned, 25 years ago.
Okay.
And it was a ridiculous caseload then. But I think my first day on the job, I had 525 cases, which is an absurd amount by itself.
That's impossible.
However, the amount of paperwork, the amount of required conditions of probation, the oversight, and so forth was so much different then, so much less, that there was so much less bureaucratic red tape types of challenges for the officers. However, to do real casework, most studies show that you shouldn't have more than 75 to 100 per officer as a maximum. And when I said 120 cases, I mean this has been varying. You know, I've been out of the industry for the last 3 months. I don't know what the most latest statistics are, but we just came down from a relative average high of 150.
Okay.
So, you know, it's very difficult to be able to handle cases in an effective way.
Let me ask you one other quick question, and that is, at today's rate, roughly what percentage of your caseload are simple drug possession cases?
You know, I really wouldn't know what those statistics are at this moment. I wouldn't be able to speak with a certainty. But because we have also cases that vary based upon an officer who may have an assigned caseload of specific, like a drug and alcohol specified caseload, for instance.
Well, thank you.
But when I had a caseload, over 3/4 of them were predominantly issues related to drugs.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. And I sympathize with your position here that you, as a probation officer, you're seriously overworked. But just knowing the nature of the government, I think that what would happen if you cut out the drug crimes, say cut out half of the probation cases, is not that they would take half the cases away from each probation officer, but they would take away half of the probation officers, and each one would still have 120 cases. So individually, I don't think probation officers are making a killing off the war on drugs, but I think we need a whole lot more of them because of the war on drugs. And see, I'm using the term.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I have a high school education, college education, steady job for the last 20 years. I do not smoke cigarettes, drink at a very low minimum, and I see nothing wrong occasionally with the use of marijuana. And I think, like a beer on the weekends, you know, some guys can be responsible. I'm thinking you see the signs, Miller Time, Budweiser, and all through the Super Bowl and the advertisements. And I never heard of a guy overdosing on an occasional reefer, you know.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That made me wonder, if we compare the Super Bowl this last weekend with Woodstock 30 years ago, where the hills were alive with the smell of reefer, I wonder how many alcohol-related violent arrests were made this last Sunday as opposed to that weekend in New York several years ago.
I wonder how many deaths resulted from drugs being alcohol this Sunday compared to New York 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would guess 40 years ago. I would guess that the number of alcohol-related crimes, violent crimes, deaths, much greater than the number of marijuana-related crimes, deaths, violent crimes. A friend of mine says that when people are smoking marijuana, the only thing in danger is the refrigerator.
Right.
And people don't generally commit DWI even when they've been smoking marijuana.
Well, that's something that tests by at least 4 different governments have shown that marijuana high drivers are at least as safe as normal drivers. The difference is when you're drunk, you think you're Superman and think you can drive like a race driver. When you're high, you know you're high, so you slow down and you watch out. As George Carlin said, if everyone smoked, the freeways would be jammed up with people doing 35 miles an hour and the radio really loud.
And a lot safer.
Yeah. Going back to the drug court, one of the things that's impressed me looking at drug courts is the money saving involved. I mean, when you think about it, here's something that looks horribly expensive. We've got a judge spending full time with what amounts to a handful of defendants. We've got caseworkers. We've got extra attorneys. We've got people involved in counseling. I mean, this looks like a very intensive process. But when people have put the pencil to it, it costs probably a tenth as much to treat someone through a drug court process as it would be to send that same person to jail. Why is it we're so penny-wise and pound-foolish on funding things like drug courts?
You've got me. Fear, Puritanism, the sneaking suspicion that somebody is having fun on our dime, that these people are, they're using drugs and they enjoy using drugs. Why shouldn't they be punished for it? Why should we pay to help them out? I don't know.
Ambrose Bierce, 100 years ago, once defined conscience as being that deep down inside fear that somewhere someone else is having fun. But I know I got a copy of the old 1935 Reefer Madness movie and used to show it, the introduction to it, to my seminar about how terrible and fearsome the evil weed was. And the students would just roar with laughter. But then a student brought me a copy of a 1990s movie called Kids, which was almost exactly a remake of Reefer Madness, but it was about ecstasy. Okay, which is about as almost, not quite as safe as marijuana. And I've been noticing in the newspapers around the country this last month, they're building up the fear factor about ecstasy mixed with meth in the clubs. It looks like that every time the drug war starts losing steam, they find a new way to crank fear into it.
And I think some of the fears come back around. Heroin has come back around. Meth has come back around.
Yeah.
We'll forget about it for 10, 15 years, and then suddenly it'll be the worst drug ever again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And marijuana hasn't been the worst drug ever for a while, so it's probably due to come back in some more sinister form.
They've tried that in Great Britain since Tony Blair retired. The new Interior Secretary, I believe it's called, has been advocating recriminalizing marijuana and stricter drug laws, and they've been hauling out a bunch of fear stories. But part of the problem is the press is wised up enough so that they're tending to debunk those stories now, but they still swallow the ones about everything else. I guess if I had a nickel, I'd spend it to try to educate some newsmen more than anything else. I think Harris County's got a great opportunity this year to look at what goes on in its district attorney's office. And it's time for people to actually do more than walk around and see what color it is and kick the tires and look at the shiny paint. I think it's time to lift up the hood and see how it works and maybe get a little bit more involved about what goes on in that office. And really, I think that the more I look, the more frightening it becomes about what absolutely unbridled power the district attorney has to affect the lives of every individual in his district.
That's absolutely true, but how are people to learn about this? Mm-hmm. That's the problem. How do you learn about it unless it's you being arrested or a close family member or a loved one? It's not a system that invites scrutiny.
And I think that's the problem. We hear about transparency in government, yet the most opaque part of government is the prosecutor's office. So, if anything, I think we need to demand that we find out more about what goes on inside. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, how do you guys feel about people recently in Harris County getting 1-year driver's license suspensions for very small amounts of marijuana possession?
Is that everyone or just teenagers?
I just noticed it recently, just by being in the courtroom. And
oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
It's possible for someone under 21 who receives a final conviction for possession of marijuana to have his license suspended. In fact, I think that's the law. I think that the legislature has written the law so that it has to happen that way.
Yeah.
If they so people who young man or woman who gets busted with marijuana, if the state really has a case against him so that he doesn't have any choice but to plead guilty, well, then the choice might be either take probation, which means don't smoke marijuana for 6 months, 9 months, a year, however long, among other things, report to a probation officer.
A lot of other things.
And a lot of other things. Or take time served, pay a fine, but have your license suspended. And, one of the problems with that is then if you go ahead and drive, they've got you for another offense, which is driving with license suspended.
Yeah, and as we were talking about earlier, there doesn't seem to be any real connection between marijuana use and safety of driving. I mean, that's something that's strictly punitive rather than relating to the regulation of safety. Yeah.
True, but that's how our legislature is using the privilege to drive. They'll take it away for not paying child support. They'll take it away for not paying a civil judgment.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with safety. It's just another way that they find that they can get away with making things harder on people who get busted with a little bit of marijuana.
Okay. Well, let me ask you one other thing here before we run out of time. And this is, both of us have been talking about needing to know more about the district attorney and what they do. Can you recommend any place where people can go to find out more about what a district attorney is and what they do? Or
go down to the courthouse and watch what's going on.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Texas Public Information Act requests.
Okay.
It's not complicated at all. You send a letter to the general counsel's office at the DA's office saying, please send me this information. Okay. And they have to respond to it. It may not be something that they have to produce. If it's not, they have to ask the attorney general for an opinion. But if you want to know something about the DA's office, if you want to see their policy on something, you want to see their policy on citations in minor marijuana cases, send them a letter saying, dear district attorney, please send me what you have on this.
Well, I know that they have to have protocols and handbooks and guidelines that they use. Are these materials available to the public?
There are exceptions to what is public information, but if they don't want to make it available to the public, they have to convince the Attorney General that one of the exceptions applies. An exception might be that revealing the information would jeopardize investigations.
Yeah.
And you can see the rationale behind that. They try to expand that beyond beyond its rationale. But you can absolutely ask. And the worst that they can do is send it to the Attorney General, who says no.
Okay.
And the best that they can do is let you know something more about your government.
Right. And you might want to ask it through a letter to the editor of the newspaper, because that might get someone else involved.
It might, but I think the best work done on public information requests is done by the citizens who get the information and then find something. They go through it, they find something interesting, and then they pass it on to the press.
Okay. Well, we're about to run out of time. I want to thank Mark and thank all of you people that have called in for a very informative and provocative hour. And I want to end as usual at saying, well, I'm glad you're calling me on the phone. That's not important. The important phone calls and letters for you to make are to your elected representatives. And remember, this year, you have the opportunity to change all of them that you want to change. Think about it, get involved, exercise your franchise as citizens. Thank you and good evening. That should have killed microphones.
The present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that